Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third and final Pest Control Officer webinar of 2022. My name is Chelsea Newberger, the Plant Health Officer for SARM Division 5, and I will be the moderator for this webinar. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. All attendees will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. We'll have a question and answer session after the end of the presentation. This webinar is eligible for continuing education credits for the pesticide applicators listening. If there is more than one person watching from the same computer that wants continuing education credits for this webinar, please contact Betty Johnson and let her know. Betty's contact information is located within the chat box and on the SARM website. This webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the SARM website within the next couple of weeks. Before we begin, I have one more piece of information to share with you. All online orders for the PCO supplies received after February 15th and through March will be held for mailing out until after April 1st. If there are any questions regarding this, please contact SARM. Today's presentation is dealing with conflict and difficult landowners and will be presented by Scott Cruikshank, a dispute resolution consultant with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Justice and the Attorney's Office. On that note, let's get started. Welcome, Scott. Take it away.
Thanks, Chelsea. I appreciate this. I didn't realize that you're not going to be able to see me, or I would have done this at home in my pajamas, as is accustomed lately, but appreciate being here today. I've only got a short time, and we've got a number of things that I'm going to try to share with you today. And I'm also used to a lot of interactions, so just I'm hoping that it will be enjoyable nonetheless. The information is very good, and it can be very helpful. And I know that a number of you are from sort of varying backgrounds before coming into this work, and some of you have been doing this work for a long time and have some really great skills in doing this as well. And so I'm hoping that I can either remind you of some of the things that you already know, or add to the toolbox when it comes to how to manage folks and work with folks that can be difficult. Give you a little bit more background. One of the things that I do in my dispute resolution consulting is actual doing mediation and facilitating discussions with difficult people. And so I have a lot of background in working with some very escalated and difficult people and situations. And so a lot of this may seem at times simple, but it is the core piece that really is where we get success in working with challenging individuals. And it's just a matter of kind of creating and building awareness. So one of the things, the first slide I want to show you is there's a story about a police officer out of LA that I want to show a video for, and hopefully it'll turn out well and it'll sound good. If you are having troubles, just please message Chelsea, and Chelsea will let me know, and I'll just tell the story. But it's a lot better to watch the video, so I'm going to go to that right now, and hopefully it goes nice and smooth and you can see what we're talking about. This individual is a police officer who gives tickets out every day, and so he's not usually a liked person, or this type of role is not a liked role. But I want to show you some of what an individual can do when it comes to still working with people that potentially could be grumpy and upset about receiving a ticket.
Scott, I'm not sure if there's supposed to be volume, but I'm not able to hear it at the moment.
Okay, no volume, hey?
I'm wondering if it just needs to be turned up, or...
Oh, it's loud on my part. I'm just curious why that doesn't connect. Okay. Wow, too bad. Okay, well, I'll tell the story then. That's what I was a little worried about. I'm not used to this platform and knowing how to how to use the sound, or connect with sound. Well, what you see in this video is a police officer, and it starts off, and of course the commentator in doing the video talks about how much people dislike these sorts of individuals. They hide in the shadows. They should be out catching real bad guys, and here they are giving us tickets and that sort of thing. And one of his superior officer had been going through his file and realized that after 20 some years of being on the force and giving out tickets, he had not received one complaint. And every other single person on the force gets complaints, and it's that you're going to get them. It's not that you're doing your job wrong, it's just that people are going to be grumpy and upset about this. And so they show him and just his approach in approaching vehicles and dealing with people, and how often people feel kind of disarmed by his pleasantness, his ability to kind of break bad news to people. And when I've shown this video on a number of other occasions, and thinking about the work that you folks do, I thought, wow, sometimes people might be a little put off by you coming onto their land. They might not know what you're doing, and certainly not in a good mood when that occurs. And so I like to show this to say, whatever you're doing, and you're doing fine, even if you've gotten complaints. The reality is, we can always do better. And here's an example of someone who has just really mastered the ability to cooperate and work with people and break bad news to them. And I really like this because a lot of the work I do is often negotiating. And people think, well, you can't negotiate when you're enforcing something, or you're providing a service and this is how it's supposed to be done. Yet this officer demonstrates the fact that you can break bad news to people in ways that they are smiling when you leave. And and that might be a little bit too tall of an order for most days, but just I wanted to share that with you. So if you ever get a chance and want to look it up afterwards, the video is called if you just go No Excuse Highway Patrol, this video will come up and you can watch it sometime. But one of the things that we often don't realize when we're communicating with people is that communication has a number of elements to it. And I have this graphic of a watch or a clock, and the idea is that you see the time and it serves its purpose, but there's so many things that are going on at the same time when we are communicating with people, and we don't often think about the minute parts that contribute to the conversation. So part of my presentation will be showing some of those isolated parts and how they work. And obviously it's the one part doesn't make the whole clock work or the whole watch work. It's the combination of that plus a number of other parts. And as this officer gave an example, if you see that video, he has this number of things that he's doing that contribute, accumulate together to really influence the people that he's working with. He has a potentially an intimidating presence. He's tall, he's got a uniform, he's got a sidearm on top of that, and lots of things that can trigger people. And so what is he doing that's also disarming and putting people at comfort and allowing them to de-escalate or become at ease with the situation? So that's part of what we want to do, is just identify some of the aspects. Now, of course, we can't do everything in the short period we have, but I want to start with a couple thoughts. So primarily, the way to influence a situation, and I use the word influence, is because if we assume that we can control a situation and not have a lot of power, we're probably going to come off the wrong way. But if we think about the term influence, and we think about what we can contribute to the way something turns out, one thing we're doing is we're not relying all on ourselves, because that's not realistic. We can't have the pleasure of saying that we did all of the work. It's obviously the other person as well, and we also shouldn't blame ourselves when things, you know, are more difficult or sometimes don't turn out the way we expect. But when we think about influence, it's recognizing that if there's two people and one person is consciously aware of what they're doing and also adapting to the circumstances, it will have an effect on the way that the conversation goes or the situation goes. And so there's these three aspects that, I mean, really quite simple, but a way to break it down is kind of being aware of and knowing what's going on for you. To be able to influence someone else, you at least have to be able to recognize and manage what's going on for you. And when you're really good at that, you're really likely to be able to understand what's going on for others as well. And you know, talking to a few of your folks in preparation for this, I get a sense that you have talked as an organization and about as individuals about what might be going on for the landowners when you approach their property, what they might be thinking and how that might be going. So as you think about that, that's particularly preemptively, you're trying to take away a lot of the things that are going to create defensiveness right off the bat. But in the moment, you're going to have an individual that's, you know, just unique. They're going to have things going on that you just may not have been aware of, and being able to assess what's going on for them, and then making your adjustments or adapting your approach can have a really great effect on how things turn out. I can guarantee that what we do has an effect, sometimes not a good one. And so just being conscious of those things can help sort of change the trajectory of where it's headed. So when we think about knowing ourselves, or sorry, I'll go back to this one for this slide. I forgot this slide was here. Part of what we're trying to do when we're working with people is recognizing that where things go wrong isn't necessarily in the content. Most people know and can manage the messaging of what's going on. It's really the defensiveness that potentially gets triggered. And that can be from things that happened earlier in the day that you had no idea about, or it could be a number of different things that they think are occurring. And then potentially what we do in those moments can continue to sustain those beliefs and thinking, or start changing and disarming the individuals that we're having a discussion with. But defensiveness is really about protection. And I don't want to oversimplify good human beings, but there are two sort of elements to kind of two sides to our brain. Our brain is this incredible mechanical computer that can do so many amazing things when it's in a calm state. When it's in a defensive state or in a protective state, what ends up happening is that a lot of things kind of close off, and then the part of your brain that is kind of operates your fast thinking, your instincts, and emotions, those are the things that kick in. And the reason emotions kick in is not because we're emotional people, but emotions are ways of giving quick insight into what to do. Should we be afraid, scared, angry? You know, we get that response, so we don't have to think it through. We just feel, and then we often can react. So one of the key places to be aware of ourselves is just to recognize when we're feeling tense. When are we feeling angry? When are we feeling fearful? And then take sort of cues from our emotions to figure out what's causing that. And sometimes bringing that into the public, right? To be able to bring it to our own consciousness, state it to the people that we're dealing with, can help them recognize what's going on. Because the worst thing you want is someone guessing at what's going on for you and potentially guessing wrong. And so that might be going on for us. It might certainly be going on for other individuals. They will feel potentially concerned, and instead of using that slow, deliberate, logical part of their side of their brain, we might be triggering something that's going on for them, and they become instinctive. And what ends up happening in that instinctive side of things is they want to create calm, safety, clarity, protection to their ego in that moment. It's usually right at that time. They're not thinking long term in those circumstances. So when you see defensiveness occurring, or as you're thinking about communicating with people, thinking about the fact that we want to stay away from that creating defensiveness, because that's where the brain goes, and it starts being less effective in problem solving and thinking things through. There's a concept that we have in particularly mediation that I want to share with you that gives some direction to how and where people get defensive, or on the reverse is when they feel satisfied and feel comfortable and happy with the way things are going. And we call it satisfaction triangle. I know the Ombudsman uses the similar concept. They call it the fairness triangle. And because when people are in a state of feeling disadvantaged, these are the three things that are either working or not working for folks. And when we realize that there are three separate parts, we can be a little bit more intentional with this. So back to the slide, a couple slides back, where it says being aware of ourselves, aware of what's going on for others, and then adapting our approach. This is one of the things that can help us figure out what part we need to adapt. And what it suggests is that there's these three sides: the procedural, substantive, and psychological. And that the substantive is the what. It's the how, what is decided, what is being done, what are people saying and doing, what's the agreement at the end of the day. And that is important. If it's not what people need, they can feel dissatisfied and potentially angry or concerned. The other two parts really play into what people are willing to sort of accept and be satisfied with when it comes to substantive. And those are the procedural and psychological things. So the procedural is how we do something, how things get decided, and how they play out. So if we're not thinking about procedure, we're particularly for what it looks like or how it's impacting the folks that we're approaching, it can come off and really create concern for folks. If we imagine what they're going through and what they might be experiencing, we can adapt our process so that it works in ways that can be very helpful. And so just as an example, in talking to one of your field officers, one of the things that I realized that I heard about was some of the techniques folks have about when you drive into the yard, how you park your car or your vehicle so that the logo is showing from a distance and people can see what you're doing. Those sorts of things are good process. Those are ways of helping people know and predict what's happening and maybe why it's happening. And then it's eliminating a lot of the things that people get concerned about. That process is where information is not being shared. It triggers people because it may not seem fair or needed. And so whenever you're thinking about your process and what it looks like, keep thinking about what is it that people might expect, and you keep refining that based off of the feedback you get from folks. And when you're dealing with somebody and they don't like what you're doing, have them speak to that and give you some insight into what it is that isn't working, because a lot of times we can change that. The process, maybe the substantive, the actual outcome, the treatment that needs to be done, it can't be changed all that much. But when we have good process and help people get there, they're more likely to accept and understand and be willing to participate, particularly when it feels fair, when they feel like they have some understanding, they're validated in their concerns, You know, they maybe even allowed some choice, because good process, it allows choice, and it may not be whether we do or do not do something. It might be about the when and the how it's being done. You know, being able to figure out how to work with somebody in a way that works for them. That process sends a message that they have power, they have some rights in their lives. People get very defensive when they feel like things are being imposed on them, i.e. we see that in the media lately on a number of cases. And it's that process. People can, there are going to be some folks that just, no matter what good process we have, and even the ability to adapt and include them in that process, can still be grumpy. But what this does is it minimizes the amount of those folks, because people can look like that, and it's just because we may not be considering the process. But when we have good process, it sends that message to folks that they have value. This is their land. This is their livelihood. This is you know, potentially an embarrassing thing, or there might be some embarrassment around some of the pieces that are going on in their lives with this circumstance. And if they have some say in it and allow them to be able to meet some of their own needs, they might be way more accepting of the things that we need to do and enforce or to implement. Yeah, I spoke about allowing for choice. Part of this is that people, you know, when we come onto their land, when we're doing things that they don't have a lot of say in, they really can feel out of control, and being able to help them gain some input into the process, like when can we come back if this is not a good time. Having those kinds of discussions can be very helpful to allow people to feel like they have a say in things. Ultimately, just listening to somebody and showing interest in what they are trying to get across can also be very good process. We sometimes feel like we're in a rush, and certainly if we're not planning well, we can be in a rush, and that rush only creates more panic and concern for people. So when we take the time, we make sure we have the time and take time to listen to somebody. It gives us a better sense of what we need to adapt and where we could adapt if we need to, and allows people to feel more at ease. Our body language plays huge into this, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. One of the things that we can, like, as you're listening to somebody and they tell you that, well, just do this, this, and this, and it's like, well, can't really do that. Right? How do you break that news to people? How do you say that? And some of it just might be a good question back to them is, well, how do you expect me to do that? Right? Because just having a good conversation and not saying no. No is one of those words, you know, if we're being too directive, it feels like we're taking power away again. Whereas when you can say, how do I do that? How do you expect me to do that? That puts a little bit of responsibility back on them to also produce an answer that could work for them. But having them try to think in terms of what is it that we need to be able to do our job when it comes to working with you. And sometimes that's when they start realizing that maybe they're being a little bit difficult to deal with. They're not being as logical as they think they are. And that can be helpful, but it's not telling them no. It's telling them I'm open to suggestions, but they still have to work for both of us. And that kind of collaborative approach or cooperation that we give to people as we validate, listen, and then even invite some sort of input on this can allow people to feel a lot more comfortable. I know that there's been a number of times when people have been yelling and screaming and swearing at me. You know, just listening and reflecting back some of the content that I'm hearing, and particularly the emotions that they're experiencing, helps them know that I'm connecting and I understand what's going on for them. And then they don't feel like they have to scream and yell as much, and potentially not at all. And that's often what helps them de-escalate. Is if they feel they're competing, that's when the power comes out. That's when the voice escalates. That's when the posture changes. So those are the kind of things that occur. One of the things to know about this whole process of people feeling potentially emotionally unsafe or frustrated or angry is that what ends up happening is they can get defensive, they can switch that part of their brain. When people are in that spot, they kind of have a fight or flight reaction. And what's built in instinctively into our bodies is our blood goes to the places that are going to need to fight or flight, and they drain from the brain, quite realistically. And so when people's anger and heart rate increases, their quality of judgment decreases. And so knowing that you have a job to do isn't worth trying to push along through that moment. If people are angry and worked up, they're not functioning at their peak. And so one of the little phrases I like to think is regulate to educate. It's thinking about, let me make sure I'm regulated, that I'm not getting also stimulated by the adrenaline that's going on. And then if I can calm the other person, then we're going to be able to be in a spot where we can educate and have a discussion about things. So know that. One of the things, I don't know how most of you are, but even though I would do this all day long and work with very upset people at times, I can certainly get triggered as well in the things that I do, and potentially feel unsafe or scared, or depending of what the circumstance is. Knowing and pay attention to that. Like, if you're feeling scared, do an evaluation of what that's about. Am I concerned that this person is going to do X? If it's going to a spot where it could be violent, why are you feeling that, and what's making you think that, and what should you do to adapt to that? And certainly, backing away, giving people space, listening to them, hopefully will be that. Even leaving, if that makes sense, to have them calm down and break away. If you're doing the evaluation and it's like, well, they're triggering my ego, right? They're causing some grief for me, that can also make me pretty angry or frustrated or even fearful. Like, people are gonna talk that I'm not a good mediator, right? We reflect on how we feel about our capacity to do our work. And so as we think about regulating, there really is a couple simple things that we can do, and the reason that they work, and they're going to sound really kind of like, wow, I can't believe I took my lunch hour to hear this one, but taking the deep breaths. And the reason that works for us is you're consciously shifting your breathing, and what happens is your body is tensing up for a fight, and when you take the deep breaths, it's opposite from the shallow breaths. Your body is, you're telling your brain things are okay. It's like, wow, he's breathing, deeper now, and he's relaxing. Even if I'm just making myself relax, what ends up happening is when my brain starts shifting again, and then potentially, I wouldn't have known, but my fists were clenched, not because I was wanting to punch someone. It's just a reactionary thing that my body will do, and I loosen up again. The reason that's so important is number one, I want to make sure that my quality of judgment is high, but also there's some really interesting scientific things that research that people are finding out about how body language affects other people. When we're tense, people can see that. They can sense that, even if they're not conscious about it, and it makes them tense. When we are calm, it helps them calm. When we smile, it is hard for someone else not to smile. And there's some research done called mirror neurons, and our brains are registering things that we can do to help connect with people. And so if we're getting escalated, the message we're sending to them is, we don't feel that this situation is safe. And if we've come onto their land and we're inadvertently telling people that this is a bad situation, they're going to pick up on that. When we reverse that just by deep breathing and thinking about sort of the approach that we're going to take consciously, we calm ourselves, and that presents calm, and potentially people will respond to that. So that's just one of the things that we do, and there's a reason for it. Now, the real challenge is just becoming aware of those moments, trying to be able to recognize I'm being escalated, I'm feeling that occur, and I need to do something about it. So start becoming conscious of it, because as soon as you're conscious of it, you have a choice. And I'll give you an example. All of you have been breathing all day long, probably most of your life, right? The reality is, most of the time you're not even thinking about it. And so it will fluctuate based on what you're doing and how you're feeling. No matter what's going on, you can regulate your breath when you're conscious of it. And so both your breath, like I said, sends that message to your brain, but it also means that there are things that your brain does that change when we're conscious of it. And that's really the toughest thing to probably manage, is starting to recognize when it's occurring, and then recognizing what options we have and choosing the one that's going to actually be the most effective in the moment. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful to you. Just one other thing about body language. There's probably some pretty reasonable stuff that you've heard, about giving people space, at least 2 arm lengths away is usually good. Don't block things, don't block their way, don't square off to them, those kind of things. One of the things that I wanted to say is think about your presence and get feedback from people that you know and trust about your presence. If you're over 6 foot tall and the person that you're dealing with is any bit shorter than that, your presence can be intimidating. And so softening the approach can be, making sure that you don't square off, making sure that your presence is softer, kinder. When you go to restaurants, a lot of times the server squats down beside your table, and that just is that's a technique to make sure that you don't feel them peering over you, feeling that pressure that you might already feel trying to figure out which size steak you want to have. But when you think about body language and presence, also think about your face and what your face does. Some of us have faces that show way too much about our emotions, and knowing that is really important too, so that we can communicate to the folks that we're with about what's going on. I want to move on to this next thing. Just part of what we're trying to avoid is people not knowing, because not knowing is bad process. Bad process sends a wrong message. Wrong message creates defensiveness. So how do we eliminate that? Part of it is recognizing that when it comes to actions and intent don't happen in the same place. Intent happens in the private. So what your intention is as you approach land, and what your intention is for the conversation is not known. What they do see and what you will see are the things that are in the public, the things that people say and do, and that's what we have. What we don't have is a whole bunch of other information, and our brain likes to try to fill in the gaps. When we have an intention, we do something, people don't see it, but they certainly think about it. And so I call that the impact. It's what the message people take away. It's how someone feels about the action and fuels the response. They are going to respond based off what they think is going on. Now, if that's not complicated enough that we have to guess at a whole bunch of stuff, this also makes it complicated. So people have past experiences. Who was the last person that came onto their land? Whether it was pest control or somebody else, was it a good or bad experience? And it could certainly be people they weren't wanting on their land. Could just be their way they were brought up, all those kinds of things. That creates a lens for how people experience the action. So whatever you're doing, it may work with somebody, it may not work with the person you're with in that moment. They might have all these other beliefs, values, current mood, stereotypes, any of that kind of stuff that plays into how they see what's going on. And so again, we want to be trying to create a situation where people aren't guessing at things, where we are sharing the information. They may not want to hear it right away. That's why we'll potentially figure out how to get them to express to us what they are thinking. and they won't say it nicely. And so what we need to do is think in terms of trying to figure out what it is that they need. What is it that they're asking for in that accusation? Because in every accusation, there's a confession, and in every confession, there is a request. And if the request is, I need more information, the request might be, I need you to, not be a threat, right? But they don't say that. They tell us that we're ugly and we should get off their land, and those kind of things. And so being able to recognize that there's a lot of stuff going on internally that we need to maybe ask about. That's why we listen and want to be curious. And we could, in a very simple phrase to start off is, sounds like, right? Sounds like, this right now is not a good time, right? It sounds like, you might not know what it is and who I am, right? It sounds like you want to make sure that you know who's on your land right now. And if we can guess at those good things, we can, particularly from based off of what they're saying, it can let them know that we're understanding and hearing, and that we have the intention of cooperating with people, not just telling people. The worst thing that happens is that assumptions are made. When we have a little bit of information, our brains will fill in the gap, and we start thinking we know things, and then we act off of those things. Just check out what our assumptions are. One thing to never do if you're trying to cooperate and send the message of cooperation is don't talk about someone else's intent. Only talk about what you're experiencing. I can see that you're upset. I can see that you might be confused about things. I can see that this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm seeing. This is how it's impacting me. It makes me want to just have the discussion before we go any further, or figure out what it is that can be helpful to you. So here, this is a slide that we use for bringing up information to people, and we call it raising issues. This is more about trying to raise an issue with somebody that talking to them about stuff that they don't know, that you need to give them feedback for. But I'm going to tailor it a little bit, and it's just really about how to talk to people without triggering them. And number one is state the situation from your perspective. So just don't use words like, particularly don't use absolute words. Always, ever, never. Anything that can be easily argued, stay away from that. Talk in terms of what you see and experience. I got a call that asked me to come to your land. Okay, that's the what. The so what, right? The so what is really important to make sure that it's centered in your experience again. That's the only thing you can speak to for sure. You can even say, I wonder about, I don't know if, I'm guessing at, but it's still your guess, your wonder, your circumstance. And what that does is that it's sharing information in a way that doesn't put them on their heels and poke the bear when they're potentially aggravated. So it might be the so what. So I came out here to do the job, or to have the conversation with you about the job. And then the last thing is the now what. And it's just getting a commitment to work to create a change, or to figure out what to do next. So, this is what happened. This is why I'm here, and what I'm thinking. And the question is, what do we do now? The last step is important, because usually when people are talking about assertiveness skills, they talk about telling other people what to do, right? Here's what's going on. This is why it's an impact, and here is what I want you to do. What we want to do is let people know that we're not necessarily going to be telling them what to do, especially as they're angry. We're wanting to figure out what we have as options. And when we create that dialogue for options, and allow them to have some choice, that's reintroducing that good procedure, and it sends the message that we value and we respect them, and we can continue to work at finding solutions to what still needs to happen and how this is going to play out. The purpose in all of this is to help people just come back down to where they feel that they have some power and can make some decisions on what's going to happen on their land, in light of what else also we may need to be doing when it comes to helping them out with a problem that's in their neck of the woods. And most often they're quite happy to have that help. They just may not realize it what we're doing there. If people are really frustrated and angry, know that sometimes we do need to be assertive enough to help them realize that we're not that we're there to work with them, but we're not there to fight them, right? We're there to set some boundaries and figure out what options we have. And now I know that there may have been some other information that you've been given throughout the years, and certainly take what I'm sharing with you, figure out the circumstances you're in, take all the information that you received over the years or experiences that you gained, and now add it to your toolbox in terms of, when I get that moment where I'm now conscious about what my options are, I can think to myself, what of these things will work the best under this circumstance, from what I'm seeing, hearing, and experiencing. One of the traps that many people get into is thinking that there's a one-size-fits-all, and we keep trying to apply square blocks to round circumstances. And what we need to do is just recognize what it is and adapt to the current circumstance. So really quick, that's what I had, and for my presentation. I'm wondering what questions you guys have or comments that you have about the things that I've shared today.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. That was an amazing presentation, and I think I learned a lot, and everyone else on this call did. So if anybody does have any questions for Scott, please type them into the question box. I do have a couple here already. So we did have somebody ask if they're able to obtain a copy of this slide presentation. So a copy of the recording of this webinar, as well as a PDF of this presentation, will be available on SARM's website. So you will have access to that for later dates. And if you ever want to go through this presentation again, because I think it'd be a helpful refresher for sure.
Yeah, and part of what I touched on is just some kind of the tip of the iceberg on some of these concepts, not knowing where to go. And know that our office, and particularly my phone number, if you want to include that, or our office's number, you can certainly call us when it comes to either expanding on some of those concepts or figuring out how they work in different circumstances too.
Oh, that's awesome. One more question is, would you have any books for training, or would you recommend any other kind of training sessions to dig deeper in conflict resolution?
Yes, couple really key ones. One is called The Joy of Conflict, and I love the title. It's a dynamic that I wasn't even able to touch on today and it's just around power and in shifting power from potentially someone feeling that they're in a victim state to being able to be empowered in the conversation. And that can be, I'm not sure exactly how that would relate to the work that you folks do, but it would certainly relate in any kind of conflict that you're in. So that's helpful. A really good book around managing conversations is a book called Crucial Conversations. And you might be familiar with that. There's some training that goes on about that, and really fantastic book. And that group of people who have written that book have also written a book called, it used to be called Crucial Confrontations, but it's all, and then they've adapted it to being Crucial Accountability. And it's really phenomenal stuff. A lot of what some of the little bits that I threw in today were come from those two books. And then we offer training as well. We have a 3-day course called Resolving Conflict Constructively that can be very helpful, and particularly if you're in a leadership role and or just in the middle of personal conflicts as well.
Yeah, the PHOs were lucky enough to be able to take part in that, along with the RAT technical advisors. It was an awesome course.
Right.
So another question we have is, how do you respond to a client who says, go do what you have to, but I'm not paying for it?
So you might want to jump in and help me, because I'm not sure of your process for having things paid for. But one of the things is trying to figure out what it is that's the reason behind with people's statements. If you go back to that triangle with the 3 sides, there is usually a reason that fits into one of those 3 categories. So is it really about the money? If it's about the money, I'm not sure what your solution might be for that. I'm not sure if they can get grants, or other folks can pay for it, or those kind of things. But there might be solutions that come there. But don't assume that that's the situation. It might be a couple other things, right? And it might be, as we figure out what is going on behind the scenes of that statement, then we can help them look for solutions and options. And depending on what their approach to that is, we can. It may be that we have that conversation a little bit later, or we figure out some of the options. But I'm not sure if there's other technicians that want to jump in on what they've done under that circumstance. But I'm not sure of your policy and who pays for those things. But my initial thoughts are discover what's the need that they are concerned about, and then see what the information you have that can meet that need or help them understand that better.
No, that's perfect. One more. We have a landowner that doesn't want to enter into an agreement. So for our pest control officers and weed inspectors, if somebody doesn't want to either control their rat infestation or control their weeds, they can write an order for it. We try to enter into an agreement before. So if somebody doesn't want to enter into an agreement but doesn't want to enter into an agreement but doesn't understand what it is, and is not willing to talk about it, how would you kind of work through that?
Yeah,
So how to kind of talk to people about situations they're not quite sure of and don't want to do.
Right. It's a good wide one, and it could, it depends on how I'm viewing it versus what the writer is thinking about. But again, it's the procedural stuff. So go there first and think in terms of what they believe and understand the agreement is and isn't. Find out if they even have the full information. If they do, then figure out what their concerns are when it comes to that. And if I understand correctly, what you said at the beginning is that you can put in an order eventually, right? And so helping people realize that there's a certain amount of power that we do have, and the reality is that that's not how we want to operate. And so that's why we're here to ask and talk to you about it. And if there's something I'm not understanding about your circumstance, I do want to better understand it, because chances are, if we make an order, it may not be considerate of those things. And so it's inviting people to participate again, and helping them understand what happens if you don't help us out. We're going to have to make a decision based off of just a one-sided part of this, and so we do want to know what's going on, and that alone will allow, and then sit in silence for a few seconds. People will start producing information that's going to be helpful to understand what's going on for them, what's their real concern, and then potentially either you have the information, or you'll be able to go to someone to figure out what to do next with it.
Perfect. That was a great tip about the sitting in silence. I've definitely heard that one before, but it's not my strong suit.
Yeah, and it might only be a minute. Like 30 seconds is a long time. we feel like 10 seconds is a long time. So go that extra 10 or 20 seconds, and you'll find that someone will say something, and that sometimes can be very helpful.
Perfect. What other body language can you explain to help with conflict and to avoid conflict?
Yeah. Now, this isn't an education, but it is fun. There's a TV show called Lie to Me that does a bunch of cases. It's a TV show, and it's about this guy who reads micro expressions. Now, you're not going to be a micro expression expert by watching the show, but what it'll do is it'll start helping you identify some of the things that people flash, no matter what culture they are, what their background is, that our subconscious and their subconscious will pick up on, and we react to it because our brains are constantly taking in that information to know what to do. So one thing might be watching that show and looking at that. There's some really good videos online from either hostage negotiators. One guy named Chris Voss does some incredible work around body language and that sort of thing. The tip is to make it open, and I'm not sure if the background of some of you folks, but if any of you have been out in the woods, you know, it's kind of like what do you do around a bear, right? And with bears, I don't know how savvy you are about bears. Some are grizzlies and some are black bears, and you do slightly different things because of the mentality and sort of the lifestyle that those two bears have. But one of the things that you try to do is not to provoke it, right? You don't startle it, because if it's fearful, what they will do next will look really aggressive, but it's really not meant to be aggressive. It's meant to get you to back off. So most often when people react the same way, because that animal's part of their brain kicks in, that instinctive part, they start barking at us. They say nasty things to us. And what they're really trying to do is to give them space. And so being able to respond to that and say, wow, okay, I don't want to, get you worked up, or I want to be able to, work at this in a productive way. Take a step back. Even that message of stepping back, your body posture, because what ends up happening is if you feel threatened, your body will look like you're in defense. So make sure you're watching what you do. Sometimes taking one step back with one foot, not in a ready stance like you're going to do karate or anything, but a stance where it looks like I'm opening myself up and I'm not squaring off. And so hands at the side can be helpful. Even hands in front of you with their palms out. And I don't know why, but our brains are just that. It's like, well, what's in this hand, right? What's he doing with his hands? Your palms open is a really, it sends a message to the brain. I have nothing, that I'm not trying to attack you. Now, if you've ever heard of Krav Maga, it's a type of self-defense. They actually tell you to do that because, one, it will send the message that you're trying to relax somebody and calm them down without telling them to don't tell people to calm down, by the way. That doesn't work. But that hands up, just below your shoulders, kind of like, it shows that I'm kind of backing off, but it's also potentially a safety thing that if someone does attack you, your hands are up, which is helpful. But back away so that you're not close enough that they can. And that even taking that one step back can give them a kind of a sense that you're not being aggressive. Eye contact, I would make eye contact when it's appropriate, and watch for their body language. Like, are they and almost mimic some of the things they're doing that are positive. You might want to match them first, and then you soften up yours and relax. So make sure your shoulders, when you take that deep breath, and let your shoulders fall. That also sends a message. People's brains are picking up on all of that stuff to say, oh, this person's calming down. They don't feel like they're a threat. And then they will potentially respond in kind. And even verbally, we have the option of letting them know, hey, hey, that's fine. I want to work with you. Tell me what is that you think I need to understand. And creating an awareness for them is really key too, because that will snap them out of that instinctive bit that they can start becoming more conscious about things. But hope that was helpful. It's hard to talk about some of this not in person and when it comes to body language. But one thing to do is one of the most pleasant body language pieces is a slight smile, not a cocky smile, slight smile with your head tilted. So when you think about being really interested in what someone's saying, people's heads almost automatically tilt and they lean in, not push in, but lean in. So if you can do something like give space, tilt your head, and then when the conversation changes, lean in. That's sending a message that I'm interested, I'm curious, and now I'm comfortable as you start leaning in, and watch for what their body language is. If they start closing off, take another step back. If they if they're starting to tilt their head or their body posture is starting to loosen, that means that they're going in the right direction. And just keep paying attention to whether or not they're following you, and give people space.
No, that's a great answer. One other question is, what language can be used to be assertive while lowering the risk of defensiveness?
Excellent. That's why I wanted to cover that intent, action, impact slide. Part of it is just as you watch movies, as you talk, pay attention to how much you're trying to, what your intent is of your language, right? Are you trying to assert power, or are you trying to share information? Are you trying to own what's yours, and you're trying to invite somebody to do something? And the subtle language can be like no. People ask us the question, and they usually ask it in a yes or no format. They ask us, and so we say, well, no, it's not. That's not happening. But what the problem is with saying no is absolute, and it cuts that off. We have to recognize that what is it that we want to share with them, not what is it that they're necessarily asking. Because what they're asking, they might be thinking in terms of either I win or I lose. And if you are thinking, well, hopefully we both win, then don't use win-lose language. Use language that talks about potential for other things. So if they say, ask you a question, you can say, well, it's a little more complicated than that. Or what I can tell you is, or part of it is, and that's actually really helpful, using things that suspend judgment. So what I can tell you now, this is a transitionary or a temporary state sort of thing, comes out in your tone of language or tone of voice and in the language that you use. So part of it is, using the word part of means that there's more to this. Part of it is that we have this rat issue right now, but part of it is we need to work with you. And what we want to do is be able to, answer questions, that kind of stuff. So what you're doing is you're staying away from things that are too directive. What you can speak really firmly on, which can be the right place to assert so it doesn't look like you're pushover, is about the things that you do know. Well, my role is to come out here. So you can be very forceful, like not forceful, but firm in. That's my role. My role is to talk to you about these things. And so I've got a number of options, and helping people recognize that there's options gets them curious. And you might not have a ton of options, but you can still say that number of options, because all they need to know is that you're not bulldozing the circumstance. Because as soon as they feel that, that's what they're going to resist against. But when it's like, hey, I want to talk to you, and I'm going to work with you, and we're going to work at going in this direction to solve the problems that you might have around this, and they're going to be different than the last guys. So let's just figure them out. That's part of it. Just trying to think about to be assertive, if there's anything else that I would suggest. Because I think the key is to pay attention to when you're telling somebody to do something versus you're firmly stating something that you know. I've got a story about being at a football game, and I sat in the wrong part of the bleachers. This guy is behind me, and because I'm surrounded by the other team, and we're getting killed at football. My son's team is being killed, and this guy behind me starts commenting about the referee calling some bad calls, and I'm thinking to myself, come on, man, we're getting killed. Like that is such a minor infraction. Like we're near the end of the game. Like really? And so I did the mistake instinctively to turn around and see who this guy looks like, who he is. And he looks at me and he's like, what are you looking at? Wow, I'll tell you what, my heart rate and my adrenaline just kicked in, because that's who part of my brain is to be that way. And I thought to myself, wow, like, oh, I'm not, mediator gets into fight at a kid's football game. That's not a good thing. So I think to myself, what can I say? And he says to me, you don't know what kind of trouble you could get yourself into with me. And I thought, well, I can really say something sassy that will escalate it, or I can say something that will neutralize it, or I can just walk away. Now, walking away wasn't really the option I needed, and certainly in your environment, you probably have the options to walk away when it may make sense. I had my father-in-law beside me, and I didn't want to look like a wuss, and so I thought to myself, I can't just roll over on this one, because then I got to sit in here for the rest of the game. And so the thought I had was, well, I can comment about is what I think about what he said, my experience. So this is the impact. And so I said to him, I imagine that might be true. And what it meant was, yeah, I bet you get into a lot of trouble. And it created consciousness for him. I didn't escalate it by challenging him, but I also didn't back down. And that spot was a nice spot to have him consider what he was going to do next, instead of me escalating him or me just backing away. Backing away probably would have been a really good idea too. I just didn't take that option because of my own pride. So I think when you're trying to strike that chord, there's lots of ways to do it, but you need to be thinking in terms of, is what I'm saying challenging them and what they're saying, or is what I'm saying just a point of view that I can share? And particularly using I language can be really helpful too in those circumstances. Well, my experience has been that, yeah, I imagine that you get yourself into trouble. And he's just like, oh, okay, well, he wasn't expecting that. It created some consciousness. So that's a few thoughts on that. I hope that was somewhat satisfying to the question.
I found your story really helpful. So we are at 1 o'clock. We do have one more question, so I'm hoping we can make this one quick.
Sure.
So this one's about neighbor to neighbor conflict. For a lot of our PCOs and weed inspectors, they are living in the RM they're working in, and they're kind of an authority figure. So that kind of causes some conflict here and there. And it complicates the situation. They kind of become the middleman of sorts. Do you have any kind of tips for them when you're working with kind of people you're close to, or at least close to in distance wise, I guess, but
yeah,
people you'll see often and there might be conflict kind of thing?
Yeah. So process wise, I think in terms of how the preliminary stuff. So where will this be an issue, and then state it early on. Pace people for the circumstance. I'm going to have to ask you to do certain things, and I'm going to be putting on my professional hat when I do that. And so, and when I see in the community, just let them know what that's going to look like. What do I do when I see other people in the community? Because that can give them a bit of a sense of what to predict going on there. Yeah, neighbor to neighbor can be really tough. The other one is the dynamic that I talked about, that is in the Joy of Conflict book, and it's called sort of the rescuer role, is how we balance power, or how we take power. If we take power in a community and then we try to not be in that role later on, that can be difficult. So we want to think about how to approach that. So Trying to keep that short, but it can be a very long answer.
No, I appreciate that. So we're 5 minutes after. I think it's time we should wrap up. I really appreciate your time, Scott. I think you were fabulous, and this was a really great presentation that is helpful to everyone, including myself. So yeah, thank you
Great.
so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.